How well do you really know your own home? What if your life, or your pets, depended on the smallest detail? What you ignore might be what saves or destroys everything. Why does this matter to you? Because the signs we miss are often the ones that matter most. Emma Carter's hand trembled a little as she slid her apartment key into the heavy oak door. Her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years, a dizzy blend of fear and pride. She was finally here, 28 years old, standing on her own 2 feet, the lease in her name and the future finally, unmistakably hers. She'd painted the living room a soft, buttery yellow herself, scraping her knuckles and cursing under her breath, but she'd never been so proud of a shade of paint in her life. Moving day was chaos. Boxes everywhere, half-labeled, teetering on the edges of cheap IKEA furniture and a sagging hand-me-down couch. There was one box, though, carefully marked with black marker, Max, and when Emma cut through the tape, she smiled. A well-worn tennis ball, a chewed-up squeaky toy, and the blue collar with Max etched in bold letters. She paused, looking around at the empty space, then knelt and opened the crate beside her. "Okay, Max. Ready to see your new home?" she whispered. Max's ears perked up, brown eyes full of curiosity and trust. He was a German shepherd, shelter rescued, about 5 years old, a little graying at the snout, but still strong, still noble. He stepped out cautiously, nails clicking on the hardwood floor, then circled the room. Emma watched him sniff every corner, the skirting board, the windowsill, and, finally, the old heater vent by the far wall. He paused, nose twitching, then glanced back at Emma. She laughed, lightness in her voice for the first time in days. "It's just dust, silly. Old building, old smells." The first week felt like a honeymoon. Emma started each morning with fresh coffee on her tiny balcony, Max at her feet, his big head in her lap. They walked the park every afternoon, Max trotting ahead, but always checking back, ears flicked back for her voice. Neighbors waved. The old woman down the hall pressed a lemon pound cake into Emma's hands. "You picked a good one," she nodded at Max. "Smart, loyal. These dogs, they know things before we do." At night, Emma sprawled on the couch, legs tangled in a blanket, binge-watching true crime documentaries. Max, ever the guardian, lay at her feet, except sometimes he'd get up and wander over to the heater vent. He'd sniff, snort, stare at it, as if expecting something to emerge. Then he'd return, curl beside her, restless. One evening, as Emma was drifting off, she felt Max shift and heard a faint, whimpering whine. She nudged him, half asleep. "What's up, buddy?" But he just sighed, eyes on the vent, then finally settled. A week turned into 2. Emma settled into a rhythm: work, walks, meals with Max, laundry in the dusty basement. She felt safe for the first time in a long time, the anxious knot in her chest loosening each day. She even called her mother, laughing. "I'm doing it, Mom. Really, I am. Me and Max, we're surviving." But the nights got heavier. Emma started waking up groggy, her tongue dry, her head pounding. At first, she blamed it on too much Netflix, not enough sleep, maybe the stress of moving. She'd chug water, rub her temples, and head out with Max. But there was an edge to her fatigue she couldn't shake. Her eyelids felt weighed down at odd hours. The coffee didn't help like it used to. One Thursday, rain poured in sheets against her window. Emma called in sick. Just a headache, she told her boss. Nothing serious. She slept most of the morning, Max curled at her feet. When she finally dragged herself to the kitchen, Max padded after her, but stopped halfway, turning his head back toward the living room. His ears stood tall, his body rigid. Then he let out a low, uncertain bark. Emma frowned. "What is it, boy?" He trotted to the vent, sniffed, then walked back, tail low. She laughed softly. "Still worried about that old vent? There's nothing there, Max, I promise." He sat at her feet, head pressed to her knee, unconvinced. The next day, Emma invited her friend Lucas Martin over, a nurse always fussing, always checking her pulse when she so much as sneezed. He came armed with takeout and a sharp eye. "You look pale, Em. You feeling okay?" he asked, popping a container of noodles open. Emma shrugged it off. "Just tired. Moving as a killer. Max has been acting a little weird too. Keeps sniffing the vent." She rolled her eyes, but Lucas knelt, scratching Max's ears. "Maybe he smells something we can't. Sometimes pets know when something's off." Emma waved him off, but Lucas glanced at the vent, frowning. "If you start feeling worse, promise me you'll call your doctor." That night, Emma tossed and turned, the words echoing in her mind. Pets know when something's off. She stared at the vent, moonlight pooling across the floor, and shivered. Max, restless, paced between her room and the living room, then curled at her door, ears twitching at every sound. On Saturday, Emma felt good enough to walk Max at dawn. The air was crisp, the world quiet. She watched Max chase leaves, tail high, barking at pigeons. She breathed in, feeling alive again. Maybe she was just being dramatic. Maybe Max was just settling into a new home. By the time she got back, she was convinced everything was fine. But as she set her keys on the counter and sank onto the couch, Max paused by the vent, nose pressed to the metal. He stared at her, eyes sharp, almost pleading. Emma shook her head, smiling. "I see you, Sherlock. Maybe you're just bored." She whistled, and Max, reluctant, returned to her side. She missed the way he kept glancing back over his shoulder, body tense. In those quiet moments, between the laughter, the walks, the ordinary joys, something small and invisible had begun to settle in their home. Emma didn't notice. Not yet. Max did, though, and in his silent, stubborn way, he kept trying to tell her. The smallest detail, the sign you almost miss. Would you notice the warning signs? Emma couldn't shake the heaviness that clung to her as the days slid into weeks. The novelty of her new independence had faded into routine, but something about her apartment felt less like a sanctuary and more like a weight pressing down on her chest. Still, she told herself, this was just adulthood. Everybody got tired. Everybody struggled a little at first. She tried to stick to her routines. Walks in the park with Max, cooking simple meals, keeping the space tidy. But her energy kept dipping lower. She'd come home from work, drop her bag by the door, and collapse onto the couch, barely moving except to shuffle to bed. Some evenings, she slept through Max's dinner time. He'd nose her gently, tail wagging, but she'd barely muster the strength to get up and fill his bowl. Max was changing too. Where he'd once darted happily through the apartment, now he seemed wary, almost anxious. His favorite spot had always been the patch of sun that spilled through the living room window, right next to the heater vent. Lately, though, he refused to go near it. Emma noticed at first with amusement, then concern. One night she found him curled under the kitchen table, his body tense, eyes fixed on the vent across the room. She tried coaxing him over, but he just whined softly and tucked his head between his paws. The living room took on a strange, heavy feeling. Emma started spending more time in her bedroom, lights on, window cracked open even when the air was cold. Max, usually content to sleep wherever she was, now refused to enter the living room at all. He'd bark suddenly at nothing, the sharp sound echoing through the small space. Emma scolded him once, frustration bleeding into her voice, but immediately felt guilty as he slunk away, head low. She knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around his thick neck, whispering apologies into his fur. "I'm sorry, Max. I don't know what's wrong. Maybe you're still getting used to things too." Then came the headaches. At first, they were dull, manageable, a background hum she attributed to stress, but they grew sharper, radiating behind her eyes, leaving her vision blurred and her patience thin. She started snapping at little things: the hum of the refrigerator, the drip of the bathroom faucet, even Max's persistent barking at the vent. Ibuprofen became a staple, then a crutch, but nothing made the pressure ease for long. On Saturday, Lucas dropped by again, carrying groceries and that unshakable look of worry. He glanced at Emma's pale face, the dark circles that had taken up permanent residence beneath her eyes. "Em, you look wiped out. Are you sleeping at all?" Emma forced a laugh. "Maybe I'm allergic to adulting. I don't know, I just feel off. Max does too, he's acting like there's a ghost in the vent." She tried to joke, but Lucas just frowned, kneeling to greet Max. The dog pressed close, his body tense, tail tucked. Lucas looked around, his nurse instincts kicking in. "You know, sometimes when pets act weird, they're picking up on stuff we don't notice. Mold, gas leaks, stuff like that." He pressed the back of his hand to Emma's forehead. "You're cool, but you look exhausted. Promise me you'll go to the doctor if this keeps up." Emma brushed him off, but the seed of doubt Lucas planted began to sprout. That night, she tried to stay awake, to catch whatever it was that Max seemed to sense. She watched him as he paced between the bedroom and the living room, ears pricked, body alert. He sniffed at the gap beneath the door, then returned to her side, staring at her as if trying to communicate some deep, unspoken truth. Days blurred together. Emma called out sick again, something she'd never done twice in 1 month before. Her boss was sympathetic, but Emma heard the edge in her voice. "Take care of yourself, Emma. We need you back at 100%. Emma promised she would, then hung up and stared at the wall, the effort of moving suddenly overwhelming. Max grew more insistent. He refused to eat in the living room, barking at Emma when she tried to coax him toward his bowl by the vent. She found scratches on the paint near the vent's edge, small marks where Max's claws had tried to pry the metal free. Once she caught him digging at the carpet, whining, then darting away when she called his name. One afternoon, the air felt thicker, heavier. Emma opened all the windows, shivering as a chill swept through, but the pressure in her chest didn't lift. She sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets. Max pressed close beside her. She stroked his fur, trying to focus on the warmth of his body, the steady rise and fall of his breath. "Maybe we're just both homesick," she murmured. "Maybe this place needs a little more love." Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "You hanging in there? Don't ignore your body, Em. I mean it." She almost replied with a joke, but stopped, fingers hovering over the keys. Instead, she typed, "Yeah, just tired. Max is acting weird. I'll call the doc if it gets worse, promise." Lucas replied instantly, "Good, I'm serious. If you need anything, call me day or night." That evening, she fell asleep on the couch. Max curled beside her. She woke in the dark to find him sitting upright, ears pinned, growling low at the heater vent. The growl rumbled deep in his chest, a warning she'd never heard from him before. She sat up, startled, heart pounding. "Max, what's wrong?" He barked, a sharp, urgent sound, then looked at her, eyes wide and bright in the faint light from the street outside. Emma crossed the room and knelt by the vent, pressing her hand against the cold metal. It felt normal, but the air smelled faintly metallic, tinged with something she couldn't name. She shook her head, rubbing her eyes. You're scaring me, buddy. It's just an old building, weird smells. We'll both get used to it. But Max wouldn't settle. He followed her to the bedroom, pressed his body against the door, and whined, scratching gently at the wood. Emma lay awake long after, listening to Max's restless movements, the wind against the window, the faint hum of the heater. The shadows seemed to move across the ceiling, dark and uncertain. She pressed her face into Max's fur, inhaling the comfort of his scent, wishing the feeling of unease would finally pass. But in the silence, with the city asleep and the apartment colder than usual, Emma realized she was afraid, not just of what she might find, but of what she might already be ignoring. She remembered Lucas's words, Max's persistent warnings, the exhaustion that didn't make sense. And somewhere, deep down, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the open window. She closed her eyes, clutching Max closer, hoping for morning and light and answers. Emma woke late, the sunlight pale and weak, filtered through a film of city haze and her own exhaustion. She sat up slowly, the world spinning a little as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. Max, ever faithful, lay stretched out in front of the bedroom door, head on his paws, watching her with those dark, intelligent eyes. She managed a thin smile. "Morning, boy. Another day, huh?" She shuffled to the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. Her skin looked washed out, eyes shadowed by purple half-moons, lips slightly cracked. "You look like hell, Carter," she muttered, splashing cold water on her face. The water didn't revive her. If anything, it emphasized how drained she felt. With a sigh, she dressed and moved through the motions of her morning. But every step felt heavier, every task slower. Max was uncharacteristically quiet, following her around the apartment but keeping his distance from the living room. Whenever she glanced at the heater vent, she'd catch him watching her, tense, as if waiting for her to finally see what he saw. She started to wonder if she was going crazy. Maybe she was just letting stress get to her. New job, new place, new responsibilities. It was a lot. Still, there was a little voice at the back of her mind whispering that something was wrong, truly wrong, and it wasn't just her nerves. That afternoon, unable to shake her unease, Emma made an appointment with the veterinarian. Max deserved answers, even if she couldn't find any for herself. The vet's office was warm and friendly, with the faint scent of antiseptic and dog treats. Dr. Sanchez, a woman with gentle hands and a steady voice, greeted Max with soft words and a scratch behind the ears. Emma described Max's symptoms: lethargy, restlessness, refusal to go near the vent. Dr. Sanchez ran her hands over Max's fur, checked his gums, and listened to his heart. "He seems a little off, but let's run some blood work to be sure," she said, drawing a vial of blood while Max sat stoically still, his gaze never leaving Emma. "We'll call you in a day or two, okay?" Emma nodded, feeling relief and dread mixing in her chest. On the way home, Max seemed a bit brighter, nose out the car window, ears perked at the honk of a horn and the distant bark of another dog. For a moment, Emma let herself hope that maybe it was just the stress of moving, or maybe Max was picking up on her own anxiety. But as soon as they entered the apartment, Max's tail drooped, and he slunk past the living room, back to his new habit of hovering by Emma's bedroom door. That night, Emma sat on her bed, laptop open, researching every possible explanation for her symptoms and Max's behavior. Allergies? Mold? Was there something toxic in the cleaning products she'd bought? She ran through every logical scenario, searching forums and blogs for a glimmer of familiarity. Most people seem to blame stress or adjustment period, just as she had. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Dr. Sanchez. "Emma, I got Max's blood work back. There are some irregularities. His red blood cell count is a bit low, and there are traces of mild toxicity. It's not enough to be critical, but it's not nothing either. Have you changed his food or exposed him to any chemicals lately?" Emma shook her head, heart thumping. "No, I haven't changed anything. He just started acting weird after we moved in." Dr. Sanchez was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "Sometimes pets pick up on things in the environment that we can't. I'd recommend you both get checked out. Maybe have someone inspect your apartment for anything out of the ordinary, especially with Max avoiding that heater vent." Emma thanked her, but after hanging up, her anxiety spiked. Was she really so out of it she'd missed something dangerous in her own home? She grabbed her phone and scheduled a doctor's appointment for herself, more to silence Lucas's nagging voice in her head than out of true belief anything was wrong. Dr. Linda Hayes's office was calm and efficient, the waiting room full of gentle hums and the distant beeping of medical equipment. Emma tried to describe her symptoms, but hearing them out loud made them sound trivial. Tiredness, headaches, the sense of being off. Dr. Hayes was attentive, asking about Emma's job, her new apartment, her lifestyle. She listened, then checked Emma's vitals, noting the slightly lowered oxygen saturation in her blood. "Have you noticed any odd smells at home? Mold? Gas?" Dr. Hayes asked, peering over her glasses. Emma hesitated. "My dog's been acting weird around the heater vent. The apartment's old, but I haven't smelled anything strange." Dr. Hayes wrote something down. "It might be nothing, but sometimes environmental hazards are subtle. I want you to get a carbon monoxide detector if you don't have one, and maybe have your landlord check the heating system. In the meantime, keep windows open when you can, and monitor how you feel." Emma left the clinic with a prescription for more rest and hydration, and a nagging sense of dread. She bought a cheap CO detector at the hardware store on her way home, telling herself she was being responsible, not paranoid. Back at the apartment, Max greeted her with a slow wag of his tail. She set up the detector near the heater vent, feeling a little foolish, but when it didn't go off, she tried to breathe easier. Maybe she really was just tired, just stressed, just overwhelmed by too many changes too fast. But that night, as darkness settled and the city sounds faded, Emma felt more alone than ever. She tried to read, but the words swam on the page. Max whimpered at her feet, standing up and walking to the door, then to the window, then back to her side. He was restless, unable to settle, pacing with a growing desperation she'd never seen before. She snapped at him, her own frustration spilling over. "Max, please, just settle down. I need to sleep." But Max only whined louder, pawing at the bedroom door, then at the window, as if trying to escape. Emma's eyes burned with exhaustion, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that pressed at her from all sides. Sometime after midnight, a gust of wind rattled the window, and Max barked sharply, scratching at the glass. Emma jerked awake, her heart racing. She stumbled to the window and looked out. Nothing but darkness and the vague outline of the streetlights below. She pulled Max away, whispering, "It's okay, boy. Nothing out there." But Max wouldn't calm. He planted himself by the door, whining, refusing to move. Emma lay awake, watching the shadows crawl across the walls, feeling the air in the room grow thick and close. Her head pounded. Every breath felt like it took more effort than the last. She pressed her face into her pillow, listening to Max's soft, anxious whines, wishing for sleep, for clarity, for morning. But as her eyelids finally fluttered closed, her last conscious thought was a fleeting sense of panic. What if I'm missing something? What if Max is right? In the silent darkness, the threat in her home remained invisible. Silent, waiting, patient. Emma was still in denial, still searching for answers, but Max was running out of ways to warn her. Night fell like a heavy blanket, smothering the city's distant noise until Emma's apartment felt completely sealed from the outside world. She'd barely managed to get herself ready for bed, her limbs weighed down, her head thick with an ache that had become almost familiar. Max hovered anxiously at the foot of the bed, ears pricked, eyes never leaving her. He whined, nose pressed to the crack under the bedroom door, then looked back at her, desperate for something she couldn't understand. Emma fumbled with her phone, her hands clumsy. The screen's light seemed too bright, her notifications blurring into meaningless symbols. She tried to text Lucas. Just tired. Maybe a cold? Max is still acting up. We'll call you tomorrow. But she never hit send. The phone slipped from her hand, landing on the floor beside her bed, and she barely noticed. She managed to pull the blanket up, shivering, despite the apartment's heat, and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, but it was troubled, shallow. She dreamed she was underwater, struggling to reach the surface, her lungs burning for air. Max's barks echoed through the water, distant and muffled, like a fading alarm. She tried to swim to him, but her arms wouldn't move. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating. A sharp, panicked bark jolted Emma awake. She gasped, the air heavy, her chest tight. She blinked, trying to orient herself, but her head spun, the room was spinning. Max was at her side, barking wildly, teeth bared, not at her but at the bedroom door. His fur stood on end, tail stiff, his entire body vibrating with frantic urgency. Emma tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her voice barely a whisper. "Max, what's wrong?" She pushed herself up, every muscle trembling, the effort monumental. Max dashed to the door, scratched violently, then ran back to her, tugging at her sleeve with his teeth, something he'd never done before. He pulled, insistent, his eyes wide with terror. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Max barked again, pawing at her arm, then darted to the door, scratched and whined. Emma's vision narrowed, the edges of the room fading in and out. A wave of nausea rolled over her. What's happening? She reached for her phone on the floor, fingers numb and uncoordinated. Max, in a final desperate move, leapt onto the bed and nosed the phone closer to her, pushing it until it buzzed and the screen lit up. Lucas's name flashed with a missed call. A faint noise echoed in the apartment, a muffled knock at the front door, then the sound of a key rattling in the lock. Emma barely registered it. Max barked, an explosion of sound, then ran to her, pressing his head against her shoulder, urging her toward the door with all his remaining strength. Lucas's voice, panicked, called from the hallway. "Emma? Are you in there? Emma!" He rushed into the bedroom, saw Emma slumped against the bed, Max frantically pawing at her leg. For a split second, Lucas froze, horror etched across his face as he took in the scene. The window closed, the stifling air, the colorless look in Emma's eyes. He darted forward, grabbing Emma under her arms, dragging her off the bed with every ounce of strength. Max, gasping, tried to follow but staggered. His legs weak, Lucas scooped Max into his arms, awkward, heavy, but somehow possible in the surge of adrenaline, and half carried, half dragged them both through the hallway to the front door. The cool air from the hallway swept over them, biting and sharp. Lucas pulled Emma and Max onto the small porch outside the apartment, collapsing to his knees. He fumbled for his phone, hands shaking, and called 911, his words tumbling out in terrified bursts. "She's barely breathing. Her dog, too. I think it's something in the apartment. Please, hurry." Emma lay slumped against Lucas, struggling to pull in air, her vision blurred with tears, of pain, of confusion, of overwhelming gratitude that Lucas was there. Max, too, fought for breath, but managed to nudge his nose into Emma's hand, tail thumping weakly, refusing to let go. The sirens arrived fast, red and blue lights flooding the night. Paramedics swept Emma onto a gurney, fitted an oxygen mask to her face, and checked Max's breathing, praising Lucas for his quick thinking. "You saved her life," one of them said, voice grave but steady. "And the dogs, too." Inside the apartment, a firefighter cracked the windows, then shook his head. "Smells like gas," he said to his partner, checking the heater vent. The detector Lucas had noticed earlier, Emma's cheap hardware store purchase, still hadn't sounded. One of the paramedics made a note. "Could be carbon monoxide. Old buildings, poor ventilation. That's a silent killer." As they loaded Emma and Max into the ambulance, Lucas pressed a trembling hand to Emma's shoulder. "I should have come sooner," he whispered, voice choked. "I should have listened to you, and to Max." Emma squeezed his fingers weakly, eyes full of tears she couldn't shed. "You did," she rasped. "You're here. You saved us." Max, bundled in a blanket, let out a faint, reassuring bark, as if to remind everyone he'd tried, again and again, to warn them. The paramedic gave him a gentle pat. "Smart dog. Most people wouldn't have made it out of there." The ambulance rushed through empty midnight streets, the city a blur of lights and shadows. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, her memories fractured. Max's barking, Lucas's frantic voice, the feeling of being pulled back from the edge. At the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed around them, voices urgent but calm. Emma heard someone mention carbon monoxide poisoning, heard a nurse praise Lucas for getting them out in time. Oxygen flooded her lungs, sharp and cold, and for the first time in days, she felt the fog begin to lift. Lucas never left her side. He texted Emma's mother, waited anxiously in the corner, and petted Max, who recovered more quickly, nose twitching, tail thumping once again. Emma drifted to sleep. Max curled on the bed beside her, Lucas's reassuring presence close by. The nightmare was finally over, but the consequences and the lessons had only just begun. The pale morning sun filtered through the hospital window, painting thin gold lines across the blanket where Emma lay recovering. The fog in her head had begun to clear, replaced by a raw soreness in her chest and a heaviness behind her eyes. Max was curled up at the foot of her bed, a comforting presence, already looking more alert after a night on oxygen and the steady fussing of the nurses. Emma reached out, ruffling the fur behind his ears, and he let out a low, contented huff. Lucas had spent the night in an uncomfortable plastic chair beside her, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked up as Emma stirred, relief washing over his features. "You're awake. Thank God." His voice was rough with emotion. He stood, taking her hand, holding it tightly. "They said you're both going to be okay. You scared the hell out of me, Emma." Emma tried to smile, her throat still scratchy. "Scared myself, too. Max was trying to warn me. He saved us both." She looked down at the dog, guilt prickling at her chest. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Hayes entered, chart in hand, her demeanor brisk but kind. "Emma, Lucas, I'm glad you're both here. I've reviewed your labs, classic signs of carbon monoxide poisoning. You're both lucky to be alive." She turned her attention to Max, her expression softening. He's a hero. Animals are more sensitive to these things. And it sounds like he did everything he could to protect you. Emma nodded, voice trembling. He kept trying to tell me. I just didn't listen. Dr. Hayes sat on the edge of the bed, leaning forward. Carbon monoxide is a silent killer. No color, no smell. It builds up in poorly ventilated spaces. Old heaters are often the culprit. Did you have a CO detector? Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment. I bought a cheap one last week. I set it up by the vent, but it never went off. Dr. Hayes shook her head. Some of those inexpensive models aren't reliable. You did the right thing, but sometimes it takes more than that. Sometimes it takes a dog's nose and persistence. She glanced at Lucas. He told the paramedics about Max's behavior. That may have saved your life. A few hours later, a hospital safety officer named Jake Thompson arrived at Emma's room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a friendly but no-nonsense way of speaking. Hi, Emma. I'm Jake from the city safety office. First off, I'm glad you're okay. We sent someone to inspect your apartment as soon as we got word from the hospital. Emma's heart thudded as Jake pulled out his notebook. Your apartment heater's vent was the source. There was a severe carbon monoxide leak. I've already contacted your landlord. He's responsible for repairs and for installing proper CO alarms in every unit. This could have turned into a tragedy for the whole building. Lucas leaned forward, worry still etched on his face. How bad was it, really? Jake's voice was grave. You were minutes from losing consciousness for good. If your friend hadn't come when he did, and if your dog hadn't kept alerting you, you might not have made it. We found fresh claw marks right by the vent. Max knew something was wrong. Dogs have been known to sense all sorts of hazards. Fire, illness, even gas leaks. You got lucky, but you also got smart help from your best friend here. Emma swallowed, her eyes stinging. She looked at Max, feeling a tidal wave of gratitude. I don't even have words. He never gave up on me, even when I wasn't listening. Jake smiled. That kind of loyalty is rare. Not everyone would have noticed. Not everyone would have acted. Your story might save other lives. Dr. Hayes returned with paperwork and a discharge plan. She gave Emma a stack of pamphlets about CO poisoning and recovery, and even a special one about pet safety in the home. You'll both need a few days to recover. Take it easy, get plenty of fresh air, and try not to blame yourself for what happened. The important thing is, you survived. Learn from it. Lucas offered to let Emma and Max stay at his place while her apartment was being ventilated and repaired. Emma hesitated, but the thought of going back, of breathing that air, of feeling that dread, made her shudder. She nodded gratefully. Just for a few days, I need to figure out what comes next. Jake paused at the door, then turned back. Before I go, Emma, would you be willing to talk to the news or share your experience with others? A lot of people think CO is just something you read about in safety brochures. But your story, especially Max's role, could really make a difference. Emma looked down at Max, his gaze warm and steady. She felt a new sense of responsibility blooming inside her. Yeah, I want people to know. I want them to listen before it's too late. After they were discharged, Lucas drove Emma and Max to his small apartment on the other side of town. The air was clean and sharp, the space bright and cheerful. Max explored every inch, finally flopping onto the rug in front of the fireplace with a sigh. Emma sank into the couch, breathing deeply, the knots in her chest loosening just a little. Lucas brought her tea, and they sat together in the gentle silence. Max sprawled between them. You know, Lucas said softly, you're going to help a lot of people with this. If it weren't for Max, I might not have even come to check on you. He's the real hero." Emma reached down, stroking Max's head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "He's always been my family, even when I didn't deserve him." Later, as she drifted off to sleep in Lucas's guest room, Emma thought of the days and weeks that had brought her to this point. The warning signs she'd missed, the love and loyalty she'd almost taken for granted. She vowed that things would be different. She would listen. She would never again ignore the quiet persistence of those who cared, no matter what language they spoke. For the first time in weeks, Emma slept deeply and without fear. Max curled beside her, breathing steady and strong, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next, together. The first morning at Lucas's apartment was like waking up in a new world. Sunlight slipped through white curtains, washing everything in gold. Emma opened her eyes slowly, as if coming up from deep water. And for the first time in weeks, she could breathe, really breathe, without a heavy ache pressing on her chest. There was a distant clatter from the kitchen, the sound of water boiling and the gentle clink of a spoon in a mug. For a moment she lay perfectly still, listening to the soft, steady breathing of Max sprawled on the floor beside the bed, one paw twitching in a dream. When Emma sat up, her head spun only slightly, a remnant of the days she'd spent starved for oxygen, but the dizziness was already fading. Max woke with a start, ears perked, tail thumping softly on the floor. He stretched and looked at her, eyes bright, tongue lolling in a sleepy dog grin. Emma laughed, really laughed, for the first time since moving into her old apartment. "Morning, hero," she whispered, ruffling his fur. "We made it, Max. You did it." Lucas appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of tea. His hair stuck up in a dozen directions, and he wore the rumpled, relieved look of someone who'd worried themselves sick and finally had a reason to relax. "You're awake. How do you feel?" Emma took the mug, wrapping both hands around the warmth. "Tired, but better, so much better." She glanced at Max, her voice catching. "I can't believe how close it was. If you hadn't come, if Max hadn't—" Lucas waved her off, sitting at the foot of the bed. "Let's not dwell on what-ifs. You're here. Max is here. That's all that matters." He scratched Max's ears, grinning as the dog leaned in, soaking up the affection. "He's got quite the story now, you know. You both do." They settled into a gentle routine over the next few days. Lucas insisted Emma rest, bringing her simple meals and checking her vitals with the practiced care of a nurse who'd seen too many recoveries go sideways. Max stuck close by her side, trailing her from room to room. The change in him was dramatic. His old playfulness had returned, his eyes sharp and attentive. Every now and then, he'd nudge her hand with his nose or flop his head into her lap, as if checking she was still okay. Emma found herself thinking about all the small signs she'd ignored, the persistent headaches, the fatigue, Max's anxious warnings. She replayed the past weeks again and again, searching for the moment she could have chosen differently. The guilt sometimes crept in, whispering that she'd failed Max, failed herself, failed to listen when it mattered most. But Lucas wouldn't let her linger there for long. One evening, as they sat on the couch with Max wedged between them, Lucas nudged her gently. "You know, it's not your fault. Carbon monoxide is silent. Most people wouldn't have figured it out in time. Max was extraordinary, but so were you, for trusting him, even if it took a while." Emma shook her head. "I kept laughing it off, Lucas. I thought he was just being weird. I let myself believe it was nothing." She looked down at Max, who met her gaze with unwavering loyalty. "I'll never ignore him again, or anyone who's trying to help." Lucas squeezed her hand. You learned, Em. That's what matters. And now you have a second chance. Not everyone gets that. That thought haunted her, in a good way. Emma spent hours researching carbon monoxide safety, reading about other families who'd lost pets or loved ones to the invisible gas. She joined online forums, shared her story, and answered questions from worried pet owners about warning signs, detector brands, and how to read the subtle cues animals give when something is wrong. She realized how lucky she was to have survived, and how many others might not, if they didn't hear what happened to her. One afternoon, after her doctor cleared her for short walks, Emma clipped Max's leash and they set out through Lucas's neighborhood. The air was crisp and bright, alive with the scent of cut grass and distant spring blossoms. Max pranced along beside her, tail high, stopping to sniff every mailbox and greet every squirrel with a hopeful bark. Emma found herself smiling at strangers, trading stories with other dog owners at the park. Max had become a little celebrity. Neighbors who'd heard about their ordeal from Lucas or the local news would stop to pet him, calling him the hero dog and asking how Emma was feeling. She grew braver each day, letting go of the guilt, and instead feeling a growing gratitude for the life she'd nearly lost, and for the companion who'd given everything to save her. When Emma returned to her apartment, she did so with new eyes. The building felt different, less like a home and more like a place of survival, a stark reminder of what could have been. Before she unpacked a single box, she installed brand new, high-quality carbon monoxide detectors in every room. She called her landlord and insisted he do the same for every unit in the building. Then, on a whim, she bought 3 extra detectors and taped a note to each. Please install this. It could save your life and your pets. From Emma and Max, Apt 2C. She distributed them to her neighbors, explaining what had happened. Some listened politely, some seemed genuinely shaken, and a few thanked her with tears in their eyes. Emma felt the first real sense of closure, a small victory over her lingering fear. Max, too, reclaimed his space. He no longer flinched at the heater vent, but sniffed it, then trotted off unconcerned. Satisfied that all was well, he resumed his sunbathing by the window, tail thumping in contentment. Emma watched him and marveled at the bond they now shared, a connection forged not just by love, but by trust, persistence, and survival. One evening, as the sun set and the city lights winked on, Emma sat on her balcony with Max at her feet. She stroked his fur, her voice quiet and steady. I owe you everything, Max. I promise I'll always listen from now on, no matter what. Inside, her phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. You should tell your story. People need to hear it. Max's story could save lives. Emma looked at Max, who seemed to nod in agreement, his eyes wise and gentle. She smiled, feeling stronger than she had in a long, long time. That night, as she drifted to sleep, she didn't feel alone. She felt seen, heard, and most of all, grateful. Max curled up beside her, sighing softly, the apartment filled with the quiet breath of life and second chances. Emma sat at her kitchen table, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen, her story half written in the empty box of a Facebook post. The cursor pulsed like a heartbeat, a silent challenge to speak up. Max lounged nearby, his head resting on her feet, his presence grounding her as she took a shaky breath. She hesitated. Did people really want to hear about what happened? Or would they just scroll past? But then she remembered Jake's words at the hospital, and Lucas's constant encouragement, and most of all, the memory of waking in the suffocating dark and feeling Max dragging her sleeve. If even one person listens, she told herself. She began to type. She wrote about moving into her apartment and finding the comfort she'd always longed for. She described the slow creep of fatigue and headaches, Max's odd behavior, and her own denial. She was honest about the guilt, too, about how she'd ignored her own instincts and her dog's warnings. When she got to the part where Max nosed her phone closer to her, she had to stop and wipe away tears. But she kept writing, describing Lucas's rescue, the hospital stay, and the moment she learned just how close she'd come to never waking up at all. Before she could second-guess herself, Emma hit post. The story was out there, raw, real, and frightening. She snapped her laptop shut and buried her face in Max's fur. "That's it, boy. We did our part. Let's see if anyone listens." Within hours, her post had been shared dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of times. Comments poured in from all over the country. Pet owners, nurses, parents, even first responders. Some thanked her for sharing. Others told their own stories of close calls with carbon monoxide. A few shared photos of their pets beside new CO detectors, a quiet testament to the ripple effect of Emma's words. Local news stations reached out, and soon a reporter was sitting in Emma's living room, camera crew in tow, while Max sat at her feet in a new red bandana labeled Hero. "Why do you think people ignore the warning signs?" the reporter asked, microphone outstretched. Emma thought for a long moment. "We all want to believe we're safe in our own homes. We don't think something invisible could hurt us. But sometimes, the people or pets who love us the most see what we can't. If you feel something's off, or your dog acts strange, listen. I almost didn't, and it nearly cost us both everything." The segment aired on the evening news. The story struck a chord. Emails flooded the local animal shelter where Emma had adopted Max, and people began asking about pet safety, Colorado detectors, and how to spot the signs of danger. Jake, the safety officer, called Emma with an idea. "What if we teamed up?" he suggested. "The city's willing to sponsor a campaign. We could give out free CO detectors with every pet adoption. Call it Max's warning." Emma's heart swelled. "That's incredible. I'd love to help." Together they launched the initiative. Emma volunteered at the shelter every weekend, helping new pet owners learn about the risks and the gifts of listening to their animals. Max came with her, always wearing his Hero bandana, greeting children with gentle nudges and posing for photos with families. Jake gave demonstrations on how CO detectors worked, and the shelter handed out pamphlets written by Emma herself, what your pet might be telling you and why you should listen. Word of the Max's Warning campaign spread quickly. Local businesses donated high-quality detectors. The city published Emma's story on its website. Pet stores gave discounts for anyone who brought in a copy of her pamphlet. Teachers from neighborhood schools called, asking if Emma and Max could visit and speak to students about pet safety and home hazards. Emma was nervous at first. Public speaking had never been her strength. But she saw the impact in the children's faces as she shared her story, and in the way they listened, eyes wide, as Max sat quietly at her side. At one school assembly, a little girl with braids and a faded yellow sweater raised her hand. "How did Max know something was wrong when you didn't?" Emma smiled, crouching down so she could look the girl in the eye. "Animals pay attention to things we miss. Smells, sounds, feelings. Sometimes they try to warn us in their own way. Max was scared, but he never gave up trying to get my attention. That's why it's important to trust your pets and the people who care about you, even if you're not sure why." Afterward, a teacher pulled Emma aside. "You probably saved lives today. We're ordering detectors for the whole school. Thank you for sharing your story. Back at the shelter, Emma watched as families took home new pets and new detectors. She saw the shelter staff, inspired by Max's story, start a guardian program to teach volunteers and new owners how to spot danger and act quickly. Jake organized a special event at City Hall where Emma was presented with a certificate of appreciation, and Max received a silver tag engraved with the words, "Loyal Guardian." Emma pinned it to his collar, tears shining in her eyes as cameras flashed. Lucas remained her steadfast support, always there to cheer her on, remind her to rest, and fill her in on the campaign's growing impact. One night, over takeout, he grinned. "You realize you've become a local celebrity, right?" "Max, too. He's the city's most wanted guest." Emma laughed, looking at Max as he sprawled on the floor, tongue out, eyes content. "He deserves it. He's the reason I'm here. I can never repay him, but maybe, if we help enough people, it'll come close." Through it all, Emma's bond with Max deepened. She paid more attention to his moods, his signals, the subtle shifts in his behavior. Their walks were longer, their play sessions more joyful, and Emma never again ignored even the smallest sign that something might be wrong. She kept in close touch with her neighbors, sharing what she'd learned and making sure every apartment in her building was equipped with working detectors. Emma realized that, for the first time in her life, she'd found a purpose that reached beyond her own front door. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was making sure others had the chance to do the same. And it had all started because one loyal dog refused to give up. As summer dawned, Emma and Max stood on the steps of the animal shelter, watching families stream out into the sunlight, detector boxes under one arm, leashes in hand. She knelt, hugged Max close, and whispered, "You saved me, Max. Now together, we're saving so many more." Word about Emma and Max's ordeal didn't just ripple out. It surged, changing the current of the neighborhood in ways Emma never could have imagined. Where once the old apartment building was just a collection of strangers and shut doors, now there was a new energy, a sense of unity grounded in a shared story that could have ended in tragedy, but didn't. Jake Thompson, the safety officer, was the first to suggest a community gathering. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," he said, his voice resolute during a call with Emma. "Let's organize a home safety day. I'll bring alarms, you bring Max, and let's make sure everyone understands what you two went through." Flyers went up in every hallway and elevator. "Home Safety Day, this Saturday. Meet Hero Dog Max. Free carbon monoxide detectors for all. Demonstrations, quanda, and refreshments. Come learn how to protect your family and your pets." On the day of the event, Emma woke early, her nerves fluttering with anticipation and a touch of dread. Max seemed to sense the importance of the day, prancing excitedly at her heels as she prepared. She tied on his new Hero bandana, now slightly faded from so many wearings, and clipped his silver Loyal Guardian tag to his collar. She caught her own reflection in the mirror and realized she looked different, lighter somehow, as if a layer of worry had finally peeled away. Outside, the small courtyard buzzed with activity. Jake and two other city safety officials set up folding tables covered with CO detectors, fire safety pamphlets, and even a few first aid kits. The super, Mr. Patel, made a pot of strong coffee and set out trays of pastries, inviting neighbors with a broad wave and a rare smile. Families trickled in, some out of curiosity, others because their children begged to meet Max. Emma found herself at the center of a growing circle of faces. Jake kicked off the event with a demonstration. He showed the difference between cheap and reliable CO detectors, explaining how often to test them, where to place them, and why old buildings could hide dangers no one could see. Emma, standing at his side, held Max's leash, fielding questions about what had happened and how she'd missed the signs. A young mother with a toddler in her arms asked, "How did you know something was wrong?" Emma took a deep breath, then shared her story again, this time less nervously, more confidently. She spoke about the headaches, the fatigue, Max's changing behavior, and her own doubt. "I kept brushing it off," she admitted, "but Max didn't. He was persistent. That's what saved us. Please, if you notice your pet's acting strange or you feel sick at home and can't figure out why, don't ignore it." Max seemed to sense the seriousness of the moment. At Jake's signal, he performed the little alert demonstration Emma and Jake had practiced, sniffing at a vent-shaped prop, barking once and then lying down at Emma's feet. The crowd laughed and applauded, children reaching out to stroke his fur. One little boy pressed his cheek against Max's side and whispered, "Thank you for being a hero." The event took on a festival feeling. Kids ran around the courtyard, holding coloring books with Max's face on the cover, a gift from the animal shelter. Jake handed out detectors and showed people how to test them. Lucas, who'd become something of a celebrity himself, fielded questions from residents who wanted to know how to check for symptoms of CO poisoning, both in themselves and their pets. The shelter's director, Maria, announced the launch of a new Guardian program, which would educate new pet adopters and volunteers on home safety, using Max's story as a core lesson. City officials showed up later in the afternoon, shaking hands and making speeches about the importance of community vigilance. Emma was recognized with a small plaque, and Max was given another medal, a silver tag that sparkled in the afternoon sun. The mayor, a dignified woman in a navy suit, knelt beside Max and offered him a treat. "We're proud of you, Max, and of you, Emma. Because of you, our city is safer today." Emma blushed at the attention, but couldn't stop smiling. She glanced around, realizing how far she and Max had come. From the lonely days of her first move-in, when she hardly knew anyone in the building, to now, when faces that were once just neighbors had become friends. She felt the invisible thread of community tighten, binding them together in a new and meaningful way. In the days and weeks that followed, Emma watched the impact ripple outward. She heard doors open and close, neighbors checking on one another and chatting in the halls. More dogs were seen sniffing around vents and windows, owners suddenly alert to behaviors they might have ignored before. She received text messages and notes of thanks from residents who'd found issues, leaky pipes, blocked vents, faulty smoke alarms, simply because they'd learned to look, to ask, to trust their instincts. The shelter's Guardian program became a local success, drawing attention from city officials in nearby towns who wanted to replicate it. Emma and Max were invited to other buildings, churches, and schools to give talks and answer questions. Max always wore his hero bandana and seemed to love the attention, basking in the affection of children and adults alike. Emma found herself stepping into new roles, advocate, teacher, neighbor, always with Max by her side. She grew confident, less haunted by guilt, and more inspired by gratitude. She took comfort in small victories. A text from a mother saying, "My daughter heard your story and made us check our detector. It was broken. We fixed it, thanks to you and Max." Or a call from Jake telling her another building had upgraded its alarms because of their campaign. The city council even organized a recognition ceremony at a summer block party. There, with Max sitting proudly by her side, Emma was called up to the microphone to share a few words. She looked out at the crowd, families, neighbors, city workers, children waving signs with Max's face on them, and felt a lump rise in her throat. "I never thought something like this would happen to me," she began, voice steady. "But I'm grateful that, out of something so scary, we found something good. A safer neighborhood, new friends, a community that looks out for each other. Max taught me that it's the little things, the things we almost miss that matter most. Thank you for listening. And please always listen to the ones who care, even if they speak in barks, not words. The applause was warm and genuine. Emma hugged Max, his new silver tag glinting in the sunset, and realized that their story was no longer just their own. It belonged to everyone who had listened, learned, and acted. And as she and Max walked home together through a street full of open doors and friendly voices, Emma felt a deep and lasting peace. They had turned survival into purpose, fear into hope, and in doing so had made an entire neighborhood just a little bit safer. On a rainy Thursday morning, Emma found herself alone in her apartment, watching beads of water race each other down the windowpane. The world outside was muffled and gray, but inside, everything felt vivid, the air fresh, her heart steady, Max curled contentedly at her feet. She wrapped her fingers around a mug of tea and stared out at the city, reflecting on everything that had changed. She had become a familiar face at schools, community centers, and adoption events, but today was the first day in a while that she allowed herself to pause, to be still, to really absorb what survival meant. As the storm rumbled quietly beyond her glass, Emma let her mind wander back through every moment. The denial, the fatigue, the terror of that night, the relief and gratitude in the hospital, the outpouring of kindness that followed. Her thoughts swirled with gratitude, but also with hard-won wisdom. She picked up her journal, a habit she'd developed during her recovery, encouraged by Dr. Hayes as a way to process the trauma, and began to write, the pen moving more easily than it had in months. The most dangerous threats are invisible. Sometimes, what you can't see, smell, or hear is the thing you should fear the most. I almost lost everything because I trusted my routines, my logic, my desire for everything to be okay. But Max, he never stopped trying to show me what mattered. Even when I was stubborn, tired, or scared, he persisted. He trusted his instincts. And in the end, those instincts saved us both. Max stirred, as if sensing Emma's introspection, and nudged her knee with his nose. She smiled, reaching down to scratch his ears. You're the bravest soul I know, Max. You never gave up. Emma continued writing, letting the thoughts spill out, each one a lesson carved into her memory by survival. Animals notice what we miss. I used to think I was the caretaker, the responsible one. But Max was looking out for me just as much as I was for him, maybe more. His persistence, first subtle and then desperate, was the key to our survival. I learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a dog standing his ground by a heater vent, night after night, refusing to let you ignore what's wrong. She paused, sipping her tea. Outside, the rain intensified, pattering against the window, but the apartment felt warmer than ever. She thought about Lucas, whose simple concern had tipped the scales, who had listened when she'd tried to shrug it off, who'd come running when others might have just sent a text. Never ignore the small signs or the people who care enough to speak up. When Lucas saw I was pale, when he listened to Max's behavior, he didn't dismiss it. He pushed me to get checked, and when I didn't, he came himself. Heroes come in unexpected forms. A nurse who checks in, a dog who refuses to give up, a neighbor who listens. They're the ones who turn the tide. She closed her eyes, thinking about how her world had widened, from one of silent struggle and stubborn independence to one full of connection and shared purpose. She thought of the neighborhood, how people now looked out for each other, how kids in the building ran up to Max with drawings of him in capes, how even the quietest neighbors now left their doors open a crack, just in case someone needed help. The power of community can't be overstated. One act of survival, one person, one dog, set off a chain reaction. Now our whole neighborhood is safer. Our building is a family, not just a place to sleep. We share meals, stories, and worries. We learn from each other. The world is still full of invisible dangers, but we face them together. And that makes all the difference. Emma put her pen down, letting the weight of her own words settle. She gazed at Max, who stretched and rolled onto his back, legs in the air, tongue lolling out in pure joy. She laughed, the sound echoing against the rain, and realized just how much she'd grown. After the near tragedy, Emma and Max became regular speakers at schools, pet adoption events, and neighborhood gatherings. She always started with the same words. The biggest threats are sometimes the ones you can't see. But if you trust your instincts, if you pay attention to those who love you, you'll notice the warning signs before it's too late. Kids would cluster around Max, listening to her story with wide eyes. Parents would ask her questions, sometimes with trembling voices, about what to watch for and how to keep their families safe. Emma saw the lessons landing, saw people become more aware, more cautious, but also more caring. At a citywide safety expo, Emma shared the stage with Jake Thompson and Lucas. Jake gave a detailed demonstration of CO detectors. Lucas spoke about the medical side, explaining symptoms and what to do in an emergency. Emma finished with her personal story, her voice strong and sure, Max at her side. She finished every talk with a reminder. Never be too proud to listen. Never be too busy to pay attention. And never ignore your friends, whether they have 2 legs or 4. Sometimes the greatest heroes are right at your feet. One evening, as Emma and Max walked through the neighborhood, the sky painted with the pink and purple of early dusk, she felt a tap on her shoulder. A neighbor she barely knew, Mr. Donnelly, smiled at her, a brand new CO detector in his hands. "Got this because of you, Emma. Thanks to you and Max, I sleep a little easier." Emma beamed, heart full. "That means everything to us, Mr. Donnelly. Stay safe." At home, as Max snuggled beside her, Emma felt a deep, settled peace. Survival wasn't just about luck. It was about noticing, learning, acting, and loving, over and over again. The lessons carved by that ordeal were now the foundation of her days. As the rain slowed and the clouds parted, Emma looked down at her loyal companion. "We made it, Max, and we made a difference." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of hope, memory, and the promise of tomorrow. Months passed, each one building on the foundation that Emma and Max had laid with their story. The rhythms of life gradually returned. Work, friendship, community events. Evenings spent watching the sunset from the little balcony that once felt lonely but now seemed filled with possibility. Yet nothing about Emma's life was ever quite the same. She had become a person who listened, truly listened, not just to words, but to the subtle signals in her world, a friend's hesitation, a neighbor's worried glance, the quiet way Max would sometimes sit by the door, alert to things she could not see. Every day, Emma found new reasons to be grateful. The scars left by the ordeal with carbon monoxide had faded, but the lessons lingered, deep and transformative. She watched her neighborhood become closer, more caring, and saw evidence of their story in the simplest things. A new detector on every hallway ceiling, the way neighbors greeted each other by name, the small acts of kindness that now seemed to multiply with each passing week. One bright Saturday in early autumn, Emma prepared for an event that had become something of a tradition, the first annual Max's Safety Day. The city, inspired by Emma and Max's work, had embraced the idea wholeheartedly. Banners reading Max's Safety Day, Listen, Learn, Protect, hung over the local park, and booths lined the grass. each one offering something vital: free CO detectors, safety demonstrations, pet adoption information, first aid classes, snacks, and lemonade stands manned by neighborhood kids. Emma spent the morning setting up with Lucas, Jake, and Maria from the animal shelter. She was a little nervous, remembering how shy she'd been the first time she spoke in public. But Lucas's steady encouragement and Max's cheerful presence reminded her of how far she had come. Max wore a brand new hero bandana, this one blue with silver lettering, and his loyal guardian tag gleamed in the sun. He seemed to know the day was about him. He basked in the attention, happily greeting every guest, tail wagging. Families came from all over the city. Kids who remembered Emma and Max from their school talks pointed excitedly, tugging their parents along to meet the famous dog who saved his person. Jake's booth was busy with demonstrations on how to test alarms and replace batteries. Lucas led a hands-on session on first aid for pets, while Maria and the shelter staff helped match puppies and kittens with their new families. Every so often, someone would stop Emma to say, "Thank you for telling your story. I checked my house and found a problem we didn't know was there. You and Max made the difference." The event wasn't just about safety. It was about togetherness, about turning a close call into a lasting gift for others. Emma watched people linger long after the formal activities ended, neighbors meeting neighbors, kids laughing as Max gently herded them during a playful demonstration, older residents sharing advice and memories. She realized that what began as an act of survival had become a kind of miracle, a way to create connections that would outlast any single event. In the late afternoon, as the golden light stretched across the grass and the crowds thinned, Emma was called up to the little stage set up beneath the banner. Lucas and Jake stood nearby, Max at her feet. She took a deep breath, looked out over the gathered families, and felt only gratitude. She cleared her throat, her voice ringing clear. "Not long ago, I almost lost everything because I ignored the warning signs. I thought I was just tired. I thought Max was just acting up. But the truth is, I wasn't listening. Not really. And it nearly cost me my life and his. I only survived because the people and the dog who loved me wouldn't give up. Because of them, I learned how important it is to pay attention to the small details, to your instincts, to the ones who care enough to try and warn you." She paused, eyes sweeping the crowd, parents holding their children, neighbors with arms around each other, kids waving at Max. "We survived because I finally listened. To my dog, to my friend, and to the warning signs I almost ignored. And because I listened, we're all here today, safer, stronger, together. You never know which small detail or which quiet companion will save your life. Pay attention. Stay curious. Trust the ones who love you, no matter what language they speak." The applause rose up, warm and sustained. Emma smiled, brushing away tears, and crouched to hug Max, who leaned into her with a joyful bark as if he understood every word. After the ceremony, Emma, Lucas, Jake, Maria, and several families lingered together in the fading light, sharing food and stories. Emma saw the subtle ways her world had changed. The way Lucas watched out for others, the way Jake spoke to every child with seriousness and respect, the way Max was never just a pet, but a partner, a silent guardian who'd saved more than just one life. As the sun slipped below the rooftops, Emma clipped Max's leash, waved to her friends, and began the walk home. The sidewalks were busy with laughter and conversation, every face familiar. She thought about everything that had happened, the second chance she'd been given, and how she'd spent it trying to ensure no one else would ever have to learn these lessons the hard way. Halfway home, Lucas caught up, walking quietly at her side. "You know," he said, This whole thing started because you listened. Finally. Not everyone gets a second chance, but you made the most of yours. Emma nodded, looking down at Max. His silver tag caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming like a tiny medal. He never gave up on me. I owe him everything. Lucas smiled. He saved you, but you saved a lot of people too, Emma. Don't forget that. When Emma and Max reached their apartment, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar space now forever changed. She set her bag down, unclipped Max's leash, and watched as he trotted to the window, looking out into the city with contentment. She knelt beside him, holding his big, warm paw in her hand, and whispered, "Thank you, Max. For every warning, every nudge, every moment you never gave up." Outside, the city glowed with the promise of evening, a world made safer by a dog's devotion and a woman's second chance. Emma knew that life would always have its dangers, that some threats would remain invisible. But now she trusted herself and her loyal friend to notice the details, to listen to the signs, and to cherish every small miracle that comes with another sunrise. Max stretched, yawned, and rested his head on her lap. For a long time, Emma sat quietly with him, the apartment filled with golden light, hope, and the peace of a story that would ripple out, protecting lives she'd never meet. And so, as the sky darkened and the city settled into the hush of night, Emma and Max looked forward, ready to listen, ready to love, and always ready for the next quiet miracle.